Come back, Will. Back. Oh, good boy. Ready, Will? Get up. Get up. Get up. Yep. 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 I thought I'd take a few minutes to talk about yoking a single ox. I know there's a lot of discussion among ox drovers regarding the best way of yoking or preferences. A lot of those are regional. For instance, in Germany and Switzerland, there's a preference many times for a 3-pad collar. You see forehead yokes or head yokes. In North America, you usually see a different type of yoke, a neck yoke. This is a variation of that, but I want to talk about the equipment and some of the things that we use that are working well for me yoking a single ox. This is the yoke I'm using for Will. You see here what we've got is a ring with the eye hook, and this ring is used to attach the britchin that we use to hold it, and helps us back up loads if we've got a wagon or anything with shafts. I hooked the traces to this single tree hook, and that goes back to the load. We've got those on each side. We've got a wooden bow here. You can see that if you look at the bottom, we've got a very nicely rounded in both directions neck seat so that the yoke can shift if it needs to, and it keeps a very good bearing surface with no sharp edges on the cattle, so it's a very comfortable system for them. Wooden bow, this is a 10-inch yoke, size that Will takes. Spacers here to adjust the depth of the bow, works quite well. And this is actually quite a simple yoke that I made. It's just made out of dimensional lumber. I took 5 2x12s, laminated them, glued those together, and then cut it out. You can kind of see the top and the bottom here, and it's been very simple, very easy piece to replace, and it's held up surprisingly well. Come here, Will. One of the key things is the sizing of the bow. That's the area that is going to be in direct contact with the animal's neck, and you want it to be nice and round and smooth. And also, we like to be able to easily, fairly easily fit a hand in between there, so it's not too tight on their neck. The other thing to keep in mind is the depth of the bow. This is probably one of the things that I see most often when I look at and I see forefitting yokes, whether it's a double or a single, and that's the depth of the bow. Typically what we see is bows that are set very low, and I think people have a tendency to think this is much more comfortable for the animal, so it looks like it's not going to restrict their breathing, but actually it's sort of just the opposite. What we like to do is set the bow so that it's pretty much just begins to touch the neck up here, and I've got some spacers and things that I use to set that depth, and that's where we like to set it. If the bow is too deep, particularly if you have a high angle of draft, it has a tendency to rotate the yoke back like this, and it begins pulling like this, and this is when it causes trouble. Part of it is it begins to choke them here, and a number of things start to go wrong. One other thing that I think is important is the size of the single tree relative to the width of your beam of your yoke. What I like to do is pretty much have the attachments for my britchin be about the same distance apart as the single tree hooks on your single tree. That way you're going to be pulling straight back, and you're not going to be pulling out at an angle from one way to the other. It's going to be a more efficient pulling system that way. Okay, this is the britchin. Hooks onto the yoke. It just simply snaps in. We've got a snap. We snap it in the ring. This is the trace chain. What I've got is a length of 1/4 inch chain, and then I've got a couple of lengths of heel chain here. I like to have at least a couple That way I have a little adjustment in length if I'm using it for different animals. We simply drop that on the single tree hook and we're ready to go there. It's adjustable. We've got these snaps or these buckles here where we can adjust the length of the britch in there. These are the trace carriers. They come in handy. And basically it just kind of keeps things in order, and when you're backing up and maneuvering around, you don't have your trace chains dragging on the ground and causing problems. Now, quite often I'm skidding logs, or in this case putting logs on my stone boat, so I like to have a low angle of draft, so I had to extend these. I had to put a couple snaps on here. They were up here like this when I got it, and it's a little too high for what I'm doing. If you've got this high and you're pulling on a low center of gravity, what you do is you're putting a lot of down pressure on these trace carriers, and they're putting a lot of weight on the hips, and just it's not an efficient hitching process that way. I like the center carrier here on the hook bones, and you can see that it's centered pretty well, and I like to keep them fairly high. Actually, wheels probably could come up a little bit, but I'm sort of at the end of my adjustment here, and I'll have to put another hole or two in here to get it to slide forward just a little bit. But it's not bad, it's in pretty good shape. The reason I like the britch to carry high is because when the cattle walk, their legs swing from this point. So you can see that if it's low and the britch are kind of tight, it's going to bother, it's going to be pulling on it's going to be restricting his leg as he's trying to move. So that's why I like to have it kind of high. And I like it to be snug when they're not under a load, but I think you can see when he's under a load, it brings it back, and it really takes any pressure off the britch on the rear end, and it's not restrictive at all. And this is the load end of my trace chain. And again, I've got 1/4 inch chain back to here with a cold link. And then I've got about 8 or 9 lengths of heel chain. What I like to do is have a few extra. Will is getting pretty good size now, so I'm pretty much at the end of this as far as keeping the single tree in fairly close to get a good angle of draft. But if you've got a few extras, it makes it kind of nice. If you need a little shorter one, all you've got to do is drop these in and you keep them off the ground. Keep them from dragging like this. So this is a nice, convenient way to use heel chain. You want to have a relatively short trace chain without having anything hitting your animals on the back of the leg or their feet. And this is about where I like to hitch with Will. Now the trace chains are not loaded there, so they're pretty loose and they've got some bow in them. So they'll come back a little bit, but really they're coming back just enough so that Will can step along at a pretty good clip, and it's not going to be, his feet are not going to be hitting the single tree. Good boy, Will. Good boy, Will. So there's a lot of subtleties, I think, to some of these, but a little bit of experimentation, and I think you can put together a yoke that's going to work very well for you. Simple, easy to use, very effective, comfortable for the animals.